Howdy-ho, thrill seekers. Good morning, or whatever part of the day it is for you. Do you know that in Japan, in the film business, it is customary to say "Ohayo gozaimasu," which literally means good morning. Literally, it means it's early, but anyway, it's a way of saying good morning. That you say that any time that you meet somebody for the first time during that day. So if it's 10 o'clock at night and it's the first time you're seeing your friend who's also in the movie industry, you go Ohayo gozaimasu. That threw me because when I first moved to Japan, I worked in the school. So people said Ohayo gozaimasu in the morning, konnichiwa in the middle of the day, and konbanwa at night. Which is that those are the standard way you're supposed to do that. But in the film business, it's Ohayo gozaimasu. Anyway, I still do that sometimes in English. Okay, that was a long intro to nothing. I just put up a new article on my blog. I said during when I put up the previous article, I said that this was the final chapter I'd been able to find of my proposed self-help book that I never quite finished. I never finished at all, but I found another chapter, which I don't know if it was intended for the self-help book, but it certainly goes along with the same theme, so I put that up yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Anyway, new stuff on my blog, and there's new stuff as of last Friday on my podcast, too, and I'm hoping to have another new one up tomorrow. We'll see if I get it finished for the podcast. I'm trying to do it every week for the podcast. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I told you a couple of segments ago, I think, my audience, you being my collective audience. Sorry, I keep shaking the table when I move my... I always forget that this is on a table and it shakes the whole thing. So it's not we're having earthquakes here in California. It's that I keep touching this table and shaking it. So, anyhow, I mentioned in a couple of videos ago that I was getting into Black Sabbath lately, and I said that I had always enjoyed the first three Black Sabbath albums, since I was a teenager, but I started rediscovering that they had other albums, after, Master of Reality. They did Volume 4, and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, and Technical Ecstasy, and Never Say Die, and then Ozzy Osbourne quit, and they did some other records. I haven't quite gotten into those yet, but the later period Ozzy albums I've been really getting into. Okay, this has a Zen point, and here's the Zen point to this story. I just got this book, Experiencing Black Sabbath. It just arrived yesterday, so I haven't gotten very deeply into it. But the reason I got this book is I looked at the little sample bits that you can find on online bookstores. We know what we're talking about, right? Amazon. Anyway, I looked at those samples, and it's like this incredibly detailed, scholarly analysis of every Black Sabbath song, like in ridiculous detail. It says the author, Martin Stoltz, is a composer, scholar, and drummer with a background in classical jazz and rock music. He's assistant professor and coordinator of music at University of South Carolina Upstate, where he teaches composition theory, popular music studies, and drum set. Teaching drum set? Anyway, whatever. It's a really scholarly analysis, deep analysis of all the Black Sabbath songs. This is his analysis of the song Black Sabbath, which, in case you're not a Black Sabbath fan, that there's a song called Black Sabbath, which is the first song on the album Black Sabbath, and the band is called Black Sabbath. So their first album is called Black Sabbath, and the band is named Black Sabbath, and the first song in the album is also called Black Sabbath. They were they named themselves after an old Boris Karloff movie, and then the song was sort of roughly, vaguely based on that movie, and so that's what that's about. It says, the main riff emphasizes two different notes, and the interval between them is what is called a tritone, or the diabolus in musica. I'm not sure how you pronounce Latin. The devil in music. Its nickname was unbeknownst to Tony Iommi, that's the guitarist of Black Sabbath, but he liked the evil sound. And then they talk about how it came from him trying to play the theme from the Planet Mars movement in Gustav Holst's orchestral suite, The Planets. And they repeat the riff for nearly 4 minutes with little variation. The interest lies in the different way it's played over the course of these 4 minutes, sometimes loudly with much distortion, other times softly behind Ozzy Osbourne's vocal line. When played loudly, Tony plays a trill, rapid alternation of two notes, every other time through the riff to give emphasis to the variation. In this trill, he alternates between the evil-sounding tritone and the missing note from the Holst theme. So he took away one note of the bit from the thing that he borrowed from Gustav Holst. Geezer Butler, the bass player, also makes the riff dramatic, especially with his bass slides. Bill Ward's drumming makes the verses dramatic in a different way by creating an earthy backdrop for Ozzy's vocal parts. To achieve this, he focuses on the toms by avoiding the use of the snare drum and cymbals, aside from gently keeping time with his left foot on the hi-hat. Notice that he avoids playing a rock drum beat, but instead approaches the drum set like a percussionist. The tolling bell, which is a sound effect that they add to the mix, which is also the missing note from the Holst theme, eventually ceases at minute 122 just before Ozzy's entrance, but returns for a loud section at 2:20. Goes on for a while about that. That's not even the whole bit about that song. What I think is interesting is this. I enjoyed Black Sabbath, the song, and the band, and that song was one I always liked, for how many years since I was 14? I don't know. You figure it out. It was a long time ago when I was 14 years old. And it was like, like getting into it for all those years. Before I knew anything about tritones and quavers and trills, well, I played guitar, so I knew a little bit of what a trill was. But, the drum, I never really noticed what the drums did, so I went back and I listened to the song this morning before making this video, and I noticed that he's right. The drums do this weird thing, which if you're paying attention to it, it's like, I don't know, does that even make sense what the drums are doing? And it's not certainly a standard rock and roll thing, and it gave me a better appreciation for the actual sophistication of Black Sabbath, because when you first hear the song, it just sounds like the dumbest song in the world, and in some ways it is, because I was going to say it's just three notes, but it's actually two notes, because one of the notes is the octave of the other, so it's just two notes over and over and over for a very long time. But it's really dramatic and compelling, and he explains why. So, here's the Zen point. Kodo Sawaki, very famously or often quoted, he's the teacher of Gudo Nishijima, one of Gudo Nishijima Roshi's teachers, one of my teachers, one of my Japanese teachers. I always I always try to remember to make a distinction because I had two main Zen teachers and I don't want to confuse anybody. But so Kodo Sawaki was one of Nishijima Roshi's teachers. And he said, all of Buddhist philosophy is a footnote to Zazen. And I really, really like that statement. Because in a sense, a book like this is kind of a footnote to Black Sabbath. You don't need to read this book to pump your fist in the air or be like Ziggy and bark, to paranoid or the song Black Sabbath that I've just been talking about to go, whoa, that's scary, that's a really scary riff. You don't need an academic discussion of the nuances of it in order to enjoy it, in order to get, really everything there is to get out of it. It's kind of the same with Zen Buddhism and, let's say, something like my beloved Shobo Genzo. You could do Zazen for years and years and really appreciate it and really get deeply into what Zazen actually is without ever reading something like Shobo Genzo. Shobo Genzo is a giant book that's very detailed, has very old language, and is quite difficult. And like this book, Experiencing Black Sabbath, it's like an academic study of Zazen. I wouldn't say it's an academic study in the modern sense, but certainly you could characterize Dogen as a scholar, and he certainly knew, without going to, I don't think there were universities even in existence in his day, at least not in Japan, without ever going to a university and getting a degree in it, he really studied this stuff. He went out of his way to find the material and read it and understand it and discuss it with people who'd been working with it longer. He was definitely a scholar. And so he approaches Zazen from a very scholarly point of view and explains it that way. And he's trying, I think, to say something to an audience of non-scholars, and this often gets lost because these days the people who translate Shobogenzo into English tend to be scholars, and they tend to interpret things that way, the way the scholars do. And so they lose some of what makes Dogen great and direct, because they tend to embellish and whatever. But you don't need all of that in order to understand Zazen. So you don't really need all of the academic learning. You don't even need this video channel, to really get into Zazen. It's just kind of provided as a supplement for those of us who enjoy that sort of thing, In the same way this book is like a supplement for people who are maybe a little bit too bookish for their own good, but still like Black Sabbath, which would be me. I'm probably a bit too bookish for my own good and enjoy this kind of academic stuff, but I also love Black Sabbath. So I'm like, there's a guy like me who's an academic, who thinks too much about stuff, and he likes Black Sabbath, and he's going to explain how he sees Black Sabbath, and he's obviously listened to Black Sabbath more than I have, so he can point out things that I wouldn't have noticed, and I'm going to go, wow. So the same deal with Zazen. The explanations of Zazen are maybe useful to a point, and as Nishijima Roshi said about Buddhist philosophy, why should I study Buddhist philosophy? Why should I learn about Buddhist philosophy? Why should I write about Buddhist philosophy? I asked him one time when I was with him, and he said, people like explanations. And I think that's really it. People like explanations. I like explanations of Black Sabbath, and I like explanations of Zazen, and I enjoy them, and to me it kind of enhances the experience of listening to Black Sabbath or doing Zazen a little bit. But it's not the whole thing, and it would be a mistake to think that you understand Black Sabbath by simply reading this book and never listening to Black Sabbath. If you never listened to Black Sabbath but only read this book, you could probably tell me a hell of a lot about Black Sabbath, especially if you had a good memory and could spit it back out at me. You could tell me a lot about Black Sabbath. You might even convince me that you're an expert in Black Sabbath. But then if I found out you never listened to Black Sabbath, I'd be kind of like, well, I don't know if you know what Black Sabbath is about. Same deal with Zazen as compared to studying Zen Buddhism as a philosophy. There's plenty of tremendous scholars of Buddhist philosophy who have never practiced Zazen. And, in a sense, you can learn from people like that because they understand the literature really well, even if they might not quite know exactly what it's about. They might be able to express something interesting and useful about the literature, about its history, about how it relates to this and that, and they might even inadvertently express some of the deeper meaning of the practice. I've found that a lot with scholarly books about Buddhism, where they seem to somehow find a way of expressing things because they're paraphrasing others that hits the mark in an interesting way. So I don't think that's invaluable. No, invaluable means really valuable, right? I think that's valuable. Because invaluable is one of those words that sounds like it means the opposite of valuable, but it actually means really valuable. Weird, isn't it, English? Anyhow, it's not unvaluable. It's valuable, and it's useful, and if you ever remember watching the videos where I had a book shelf behind me, a lot of those books are Buddhist books. And I read them all the time, and I find them really useful, and I write them. So I obviously think there's some use for them, but I think the actual practice is much more important, and that's what I want to encourage people to do, is actually practice Zazen, and they don't need to read it at all. So there you go. That's my talk about reading, and I'm going to go find out what Ziggy's barking at. So if you want to support me, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main ways of making a living these days, so I really appreciate those of you who continue to support me. But as I always say, this is offered for free, so you don't have to pay anything. If you don't want to pay anything, that's fine. You can still enjoy it, and I appreciate your just enjoying it, and I also appreciate your donations. So thank you very much. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Ziggy, what are you barking at? What are you barking at? What are you barking at? What do you see? Oh, I see what you're barking at. All right, Ziggy. Oh no.
It's working.
Oh no.
That's why.